Richard waves his hand and exclaims, "Excuse me, over here." Marcus, looking confused, still decides to approach the table and says, yes? Richard responds, "What took you so long? Can I get some water? And be quick about it." Raising an eyebrow, Marcus replies, "Sir, I think there's been a—" Richard interrupts him impatiently. "Don't give me excuses. I've been sitting here for 10 minutes. Just get me the water." After a brief pause, Marcus smirks and says, "Sure, I'll get you some water." Marcus walks away to a nearby service station, grabs a jug and a glass, and returns, placing them on the table with deliberate precision. Richard remarks, "Finally, that wasn't so hard, was it?" Just as Marcus is about to reply, David, the company's CEO, arrives at the table. David greets Richard enthusiastically. "Richard, glad you could make it." Richard responds, "David, took you long enough, and your waiter here could use some training." Looking confused, David clarifies, "Waiter? Oh, you mean Marcus?" Richard's expression shifts slightly as he says, "Marcus?" David explains, "Yes, Marcus is the lead developer of the app we're here to discuss." Richard, now laughing nervously, says, "Oh, well, my mistake." Marcus responds coolly, "No problem." David takes a seat and says, "Let's get down to business. Marcus, can you explain the app to Richard?" Marcus nods and begins, "Our app uses advanced algorithms to analyze user behavior and predict preferences with unmatched accuracy." Richard asks, "Predict preferences? How exactly?" Marcus explains, "By leveraging machine learning models trained on diverse data sets, the app adjusts to user habits dynamically." Richard remarks, "Impressive. And the key features?" Marcus lists confidently, "Three main ones: accuracy, accessibility, and efficiency." Richard continues his questioning, "And what language is it written in?" Marcus replies, "Primarily Python, with some modules in C++ for performance-heavy tasks." Richard nods, though he seems skeptical, and says, "Interesting." As the discussion continues, Richard becomes increasingly dismissive, frequently interrupting Marcus. At one point, Richard interrupts to ask David, "So David, how did you come across this guy? Did you find him at some diversity hiring event?" David's smile tightens as he responds, "Marcus and I met at a tech conference. His work caught my attention immediately." Richard replies, "Well, good for him." Later, while Marcus steps away to take a call, Richard pulls David aside. Richard says, "Look, David, are you sure this guy's the real deal?" David frowns and asks, "What do you mean?" Richard lowers his voice and says, "You know exactly what I mean. People like him aren't known for coding or tech. They're better suited elsewhere." David, visibly displeased, responds, "Richard, that's a disgusting thing to say." Richard defends himself. "I'm just being realistic. You need my money, don't you? Then maybe you should reconsider who you let represent your company." David pauses, glancing across the room at Marcus. When Marcus returns, he senses the tension and asks, "Everything okay?" Richard quickly puts on a fake smile and says, "Of course." "Now, Marcus, if this app is so revolutionary, why hasn't anyone else thought of it?" Marcus responds calmly, "Innovation often comes from new perspectives." Richard smirks mockingly and says, "New perspectives, huh? Interesting." A waiter brings champagne to the table. Richard grabs a glass and raises it sarcastically, saying, "To innovation. And of course, to those who dream big, even when the odds aren't in their favor." Marcus, setting his glass down, looks directly at Richard and says, "Do you have a problem with me?" Feigning surprise, Richard responds, "Problem? Not at all, just making sure you're up for the challenge." Marcus glances at David, who looks conflicted but remains silent. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stands up and says, "I don't need this." Richard looks shocked and asks, "Excuse me?" Marcus responds firmly, "I don't need your condescension or your money." Richard laughs incredulously and says, "Bold words for someone pitching to me. Without me, this app is going nowhere." Marcus, unwavering, replies, "Without you, it will still succeed, because I believe in what I've built." Finally, David speaks up, saying, "Marcus is right. Richard, we're not compromising our values for your investment. Richard stares at David in disbelief and says, "You're kidding me. Do you even know how much money you're walking away from?" David replies confidently, "Enough to know it's not worth selling out." Marcus and David leave Richard at the table. As they walk out of the restaurant, David turns to Marcus and says, "I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner." Marcus replies, "You did when it mattered." David smiles and says, "Let's find an investor who respects what we're building and who we are." Marcus nods, agreeing wholeheartedly. The two shake hands, ready to face the challenges ahead together. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. Your support inspires us to create more stories based on real-life incidents.